This is Reimagining Higher Education, your go-to podcast with remarkable education leaders sharing personal stories from their experience in and around the sector, including reflection and hope for progress in the sector. With your host, Professor Judyth Sachs, former PVC Learning and Teaching at the University of Sydney, Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Provost at Macquarie University, and Special Advisor in Higher Education at KPMG, and now Chief Academic Officer at Studiosity. Welcome.
It gives me great pleasure to introduce the Vice-Chancellor of University of Otago, Grant Robertson. Grant, you've had a remarkable career, and a career that is ranging from public service, diplomacy, governance, government, and now you're leading one of New Zealand's oldest and top universities. So rather than do the story of your life, could you show us what you brought as an object that describes your leadership and learning journey?
Oh, kia ora, Judith. Thank you. Yes, what I have here is a set of student newspapers from the year that I was the president of the Student Association, and this was a gift that is given to, I think, or still given now to all of the student presidents at the University of Otago as a reminder of their time in that leadership role. And for me, that was 32 years ago. I grew up down here in Dunedin, where the University of Otago is based, and attended the university and was the Student Union president in 1993. I was heavily involved in student politics. I ended up actually being the student president for New Zealand, and did that job based up in Wellington. And so have felt a strong connection with this university and with education in general. But then my career did take a divergent step where I did go off and become a diplomat, worked for New Zealand's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and had some time up in Samoa with an official development program up there, and then in New York at the United Nations, where I represented New Zealand and mainly around environmental and development issues up there. I came back to New Zealand to work in the government of Helen, who was the then Prime Minister of New Zealand, and I did that for about 4 or 5 years. Came back and worked for the University of Otago in a research development role, and then found my way back into politics myself and became a Member of Parliament based up in Wellington. Spent 15 years as a Member of Parliament, and 6 of those as a Minister of Finance through the COVID period, as well as Deputy Prime Minister to Jacinda Ardern in her time as Prime Minister. So a very varied career, which has seen me end up back here 6 months ago, taking up the role of Vice-Chancellor, which, if you had asked the student president of 1993 if he ever thought he was going to be the Vice-Chancellor, I would have laughed, given that I spent a fair bit of my time telling the Vice-Chancellor how to do his job, but I didn't ever actually expect to get it.
So that's a remarkable career, and you've worked with and for 2 remarkable women leaders. I mean, Helen Clark stands out as a remarkable leader, but Jacinda Ardern also stands out as a remarkable leader, both for her humility, her courage, but also her ability to know when it's time to leave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, when I spoke at the end of my time in Parliament, I actually specifically referred to the extraordinary women that I've worked with and for over the years. There was a third one, another government minister, Marion Hobbs, who was an amazing educationalist herself. And I learned a huge amount from working with all of those women. Both Helen and Jacinda, outstanding leaders, different people. Helen sort of found herself forged through the fire of difficult politics in New Zealand in the 1980s and 90s, and was an extraordinary leader who pulled an amazing coalition of people together, and I was hugely honoured to work for her. Razor sharp intellect, never let anything go by. If you got a number wrong in a speech you wrote for her, you'd know about it straight away. But just, huge impact on me for her intellect and for her curiosity and drive. Working with Jacinda is just the highlight of my working life. I think New Zealand was extremely blessed to have Jacinda as our leader through COVID. Not only is she also an extremely intelligent and insightful person, her level of compassion and empathy was just extraordinary. And we had to deal with many different crises in our 6 years in government, but her leadership, really did take New Zealand through an incredibly difficult time. So yeah, I've been very lucky with those strong women in my life. My mother being probably the strongest of all the women in my life, but been very fortunate to work alongside them.
So when you were also giving your introduction, there were two things that were really clear to me. One, politics has been in your blood. So you actually understand it. And also place is important for you, that coming back home to Dunedin and the Otago region has also been important to you. Now, as a Vice-Chancellor, how do you use those great insights and skills to lead an institution during times that are really tough, not only in New Zealand, but everywhere?
Yeah, very insightful observations. I think they're both true. Look, I never thought I would get this job because I'm not a lifetime academic. And the truth is that is the profile of the person who's had this job for 150 odd years. And so I've always felt very strongly about the importance of this place, of the University of Otago, and indeed of Dunedin, and have always wanted actually to come back here. And I mentioned my mother before; she still lives here, and this is very much my home. In that sense, there's a word in Māori culture which is tūranga waiwai, which literally means a place to stand. And I very much feel that Dunedin has always been my place to stand, and that the University of Otago has as well. And so when the opportunity to come back as the Vice-Chancellor arose, I was, as I say, hesitant, but very much wanted to do it. This institution means a lot to me. It gave me my start in life. It's played such a significant role in New Zealand's history and the world's, in a number of different fields. And then on top of that is the place of education in our world. And you rightly point out that the world we live in today is full of challenges, full of questions about what is the truth and what's evidence and how do we make decisions. And I think we live in a world where the place of education and higher education is more important than ever. And so the opportunity to come back and lead the university, as you say, through some pretty challenging times, was one that I just couldn't look away from. And then the University of Otago Council, bravely enough, decided to appoint me. And I'm really delighted to be able to now play a role in enhancing this great institution, building on what's happened here, but also making sure that we play our part in taking on some of those global challenges I've just mentioned.
So as a local coming home, as it were, both to the institution but also to the place, what sort of insights do you have about what your role is as a Vice-Chancellor and where the direction of the university?
Yeah, and I think this is, there are disadvantages and advantages of not being a lifetime academic, and the disadvantages are obvious in the sense that I haven't worked through that role in the institution and don't have that intimate understanding of the life of an academic. Although I like to think of myself as academic adjacent. I have two brothers who are both professors in the United States, and so I've spent a lot of time over the years talking with them about their careers. But the advantage, I think, of being a non-academic coming back in here is that I can locate the university in the world that we live in today and think about the ways in which we can connect it better. And I think that's probably my starting point, is that, as I say, I see every day the reason why universities matter and why the University of Otago matters in terms of the teaching, the research, the discoveries, the role of critic and conscience in society. What I bring, I think, is an analysis of where things are in the world, the big challenges of climate change, of child poverty, of well-being of people. How can we as an institution contribute to meeting those challenges and thriving as people? And so I think it's that perspective. Obviously, I understand how universities are funded, having had a pretty significant role in that over recent years. And so I think I can bring to bear a strong feeling of admiration for what's done at universities with a fairly clear head about the world that we work in.
And I think given that the world is such a different place, we need vice-chancellors who haven't been institutionalized in academic institutions to have that insight about how things are done elsewhere that can be translated into universities. So thinking about the politics part and being able to influence government, what's the toolkit that you have that, and this government is not of your own colours. And they have very, very different, very different priorities and very different assumptions about the role of education and particularly the role of universities. So how are you going to manage that sort of labyrinth?
I think one of the things which can sound harsh but isn't meant to be is that universities are not quite as important as we think they are. And what I mean by that is in the minds of decision makers, universities are not popping up every day. And despite the extraordinary work and the dedication and commitment of university staff, that is the truth. And so one of the things in terms of advocacy is making ourselves relevant, making ourselves useful to a government, whatever its colour or stripe. And while I might have my own personal views about particular government policies, this is the democratically elected government and we have to work alongside them. So that's perhaps my launch pad, is to say, well, what can we do to be useful, to be helpful? As I say, to bring together the people who can help resolve the big challenges that governments have. And I look at an example here at the University of Otago is the Dunedin study, which is the longitudinal study that's been following all of the babies born in the hospital here in Dunedin since 1972. It's an extraordinary, globally important piece of work that makes a difference in policy making, and I've seen it make a difference in policy making under different governments of different stripes. Our ability to bring those things to bear, to start to unravel some of the big problems, that's where we can be helpful. Secondly, are just some of the practicalities of decision making, how decisions are made, when they're made, who are the people who provide the advice. That's the kind of knowledge I have, which I can bring to bear, and not only for Otago, I might say, but also working with my Vice-Chancellor colleagues around the country to make sure that we're talking to the right people at the right time. And that might sound like quite a mundane thing, but it is actually very important when you're wanting to influence the decisions that government makes.
So you're talking about relevance, influencing, and just reposition it. So that's also about the language you use. So the language has to be and the research has to be much more translational, so that politicians in particular can say, that's a good investment. There's a return on that investment, because the language of business is now everywhere. So, that Otago study is remarkable. But what other kinds of studies would you encourage your academic colleagues, not only at Otago, but elsewhere?
I think it's a two-way piece of translation. That's the first thing I would say, because I absolutely agree with you that governments will be looking for things that are immediately able to be implemented and worked on, and that's good, and we should be in those places. The translation that goes back the other way is understanding the importance of basic research to underpin that we don't suddenly invent researchers who are going to make those breakthroughs. They spend years studying and building their knowledge base, and the importance of core research, of blue skies research, is important alongside the translational research. So I think both matter. In terms of your question, I think a good example for me is the area of climate change, where every government around the world is looking not only for mitigation strategies, but adaptation strategies as well. In any given university, across different faculties and divisions, we have people who can provide those answers. What I perhaps don't think universities of New Zealand anyway have been doing in recent times is bringing that together. And I think this also fits with where students are at as well. They're not necessarily going to say, well, I want to come and do a Bachelor of Science or a Bachelor of Commerce, but I might want to be the person that solves climate financing. That means bringing together people, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary work to provide those solutions. And that's certainly, as I say, what I think is motivating a lot of our students, but it's also what our what governments are looking for, is to bring those together. Many years ago, when I worked for the university and in different guise, I helped one of our top researchers, Philippa Howden-Chapman, establish the Centre for Sustainable Cities. That's a good example of bringing together people from health, from science, from commerce, from the humanities into one place to say, well, here's how we bring those solutions together. So I think that is probably one of the biggest things I think universities need to get their head around. I understand the importance of a discipline to a person who's worked in that discipline through their life. We need to support them to be the best they can be. But the message I've been giving to my colleagues down here in Dunedin is it's also now time to look out and to look up and to see where the connections are, both within a university and outside it, to help solve those big problems.
So you've been enrolled for 6 months. You've walked around the campus. Part of that time was summer break, so that limits probably. So 4 months walking around. What are you seeing? What are you seeing about students' lives, about student experience, and what students want?
Yeah, it's fascinating to be back on this campus, and noting that Otago obviously has other campuses around the country, especially our clinical medical schools in Christchurch and Wellington, who I've also visited. From a student perspective, it's very different than 30-something years ago. I feel like the students I'm meeting, as I say, are much less, one qualification focused. They're quite purpose driven. They're looking to come out of this with a qualification that they can utilize in their particular area. Now, that might be a business one, but it also might be in terms of healthcare or community work, but it isn't necessarily subject focused, perhaps in the way it might have been when I was a student 30 odd years ago. The less pleasant thing, I think, for students is the pressure that they feel. The pressure of getting through their degree as quickly as they can. It's costly. They want to be moving forward straight away. They don't have as much opportunity, I don't feel, to sit back and think and absorb and take their time. And one of the things I do think universities have, perhaps over almost any other institution I can think of, is the commodity of time, the ability to go deep, to research, to think, to consider. I want our students to have that opportunity as much as possible. So, I see a group of people under pressure, but also full of ideas and full of energy. And one of my favorite things to do if I've been having a bad day is look out the window and at 10 to the hour and watch the students go from one lecture to another lecture and see thousands of people hungry to learn and great and really pleased to be here. And I know our staff feel the same way, that they get a lot of energy from that, and so that's been a really enjoyable part of being around campus. The other thing I'd say is they've got a lot more food options than I had when I was here. There's all sorts of food trucks and coffee carts and things, which is great to see too.
So do you have is your university a residential campus but also commuting students, or is it mainly residential?
Much a residential campus, so about 80% of our students come from outside of the Otago Southland area where we're based here. It's always been significant. That's a higher percentage than it was when I was a student here. So that first year life in residential colleges is enormously important. It's a great experience. The students invariably, no matter which of our residential colleges they go into, say it's the best and that they have an amazing introduction to being down here. And then we are quite unique in New Zealand in that in the following years, people live in the immediate environs. We very much have a student neighbourhood. This is a student city. And so it's an on-campus experience, which is obviously challenged somewhat nowadays, both through what happened in COVID, but also the growth of online learning, of people believing that perhaps that experience of being in person isn't as necessary as it once was. I still think it is necessary, but more than that, I think it's valuable. We learn so much from being with each other, and while we're involved as much as anybody is in online learning, that residential experience, that experience of sharing ideas with each other remains important. And it's very much a big part of Otago's offering.
So you've inherited a university that had to manage its way through COVID, which had major implications on delivery, pedagogy, student experience. And now you're hit with AI and the associated challenges with AI, in particular integrity. What do you see as the best way for the university to manage these fast-moving, institutional changing activities that are happening?
Yeah, it's obviously the big existential challenge, isn't it, for universities and higher education in general. The way I look at it is twofold. The first is that we've just been doing a piece of work in my first 6 months here around looking at our digital learning environment. And one of the really important elements of that for me is whether you're on campus or off campus, you're having a digital learning experience. And I look at the students who interact, on a day-to-day basis with their lecturers via digital means, the ones who can't make a particular lecture but watch it online. So that digital learning experience is now something that everybody is doing, whether you're on campus or off campus. The second thing is around artificial intelligence, and look, I can understand why for a lot of people within the university environment it's threatening. It challenges the mode of delivery of a lot of what we've done. It challenges the question of research-based teaching, of evidence. We can't wish AI away. It isn't going anywhere. And so therefore, as universities, we have to work out how to work with it, to play our role as we always have done of questioning, of challenging, but also of asking our students to critically analyse what AI means. And so my view is that, we will work with AI both from a pedagogical point of view, but also from an institutional one. But we'll make sure that we're continuing to add value to what people can identify and use and find with AI, to be the critic and conscience of the future, to be the problem solvers, to understand how information finds its way within an AI framework and how they can influence that. And I often think about this in the sense here at Otago, we have a strategic plan that goes out to 2030. And all things being equal, my granddaughter will arrive at university in 2030. And I think about what kind of institution should we be so that she flourishes and thrives. And as an institution, we need to be one that understands AI, works with it, but casts a critical eye over it. And she'll know more about AI when she arrives than most of the staff here probably do. And so we have to be in front of that, supporting our staff to be able to lead and utilise AI, whilst, as I say, also casting a critical eye over it.
And the whole business with AI is a major inflection point, because it actually is both a productivity tool, but it's also a learning tool. And I think that the challenge for you as a Vice-Chancellor needs to be around balancing those, but with the focus on learning rather than just the default position of productivity. So can you just give me a sense of how you might manage that?
Yeah, that is, I think you're absolutely right about the analysis of it. One of our staff members here who leads our AI and ethics work made an interesting observation to me, where he uses, he's a philosophy lecturer by trade, and he uses AI to help identify good examples or metaphors that his students will actually relate to, as opposed to his cultural references that might be 20 or 30 years old. And so he's utilising AI as a teaching tool to make sure he's providing the most relevant examples. It's just a very small example of the way in which we can reach into AI to be useful to us. One of the other things that's been raised with me by staff is the way in which we, tend to teach to the median or the mean in a class, in the sense that we will try and find something that resonates. Making use of AI to build knowledge bases so that we can teach on top of that. Not having students tell us they don't utilise AI when we know they do. And actually being able to break that barrier down and say, look, we know you're going to be using it. Here's how we want to be able to work with you to make sure it's useful and that you're still getting the information that you need. So we've got a whole stream of work around the way in which AI will be part of a teaching and learning tool for us. I have to say you need to get the infrastructure right for that, making sure that we invest in the technology, making sure that our students find that accessible, all of them, and then making sure that there's an understanding and a confidence for our staff in using it. But I come back to where I sort of started with all of this. The face-to-face experience of being part of learning will never, ever go away, in my view. We are people, we are human beings, we are full of flaws and frailties, and we need to make sure that we're working with those and utilising them in the best possible way alongside those technological solutions.
So you mentioned that your granddaughter will be starting here in 2030. What sort of university do you expect her to come to? Because you'll be part of the legacy.
Yeah, I think it's my entire job actually, and it's not just about my granddaughter, but all of those who come in 2030. From a New Zealand context, my starting point is being a university that understands and appreciates our history, and in particular the Treaty of Waitangi, Te Tiriti o Waitangi. My granddaughter is Māori, and so she's the kind of student who we need to make sure we're her university of choice. We will have an even more diverse population here in New Zealand than we do now, and so that's my starting point, is making sure that we have a university where the diverse range of students who arrive here can flourish. Secondly, it's got to be a university, as I say, that looks past the silos of traditional faculty or divisions, that looks to the kind of purpose-driven students that my granddaughter and her cohort will be, and provides offerings that are of the highest academic integrity and standard, but also meet where they want to be going into the future. No generation knows what the next generation's experience will fully be, but if we uphold the values of tertiary education of the University of Otago and apply it to a modern setting, then I'm confident we'll be doing the best by those students, as we have for more than 150 years. And then also making sure that we are at the cutting edge of technology, that we're utilising it well, that we're fully digitally enabled, because she will be when she arrives, and so we've got to be there as well. And then finally, from an Otago perspective, I still see us as having that core residential element to what we do. I think we're going to have to battle and fight that, but for me it's a little bit like the death of the bookshop. You know, everybody wrote off books, everybody said they wouldn't be here, or the death of radio. You know, these are things where people thought technology would destroy them, and they haven't, and that's because there's an inherent value, and I feel the same way about universities, that we have that inherent value in our people, and our place is important. But equally, there'll be blended learning. There'll be people learning in different places and coming here for different times. We have to accept that, but a core part of our offering, I think, will still be what happens on our campus here in Dunedin.
So just continuing with the students, what is the mark of the Otago students? So when students graduate, and by the time you finish this your term as Vice-Chancellor, you will have been to many graduations. And they're occasions of joy, they're occasions of nervousness, and but occasions of great pride. What's the mark of the Otago graduate?
I think I can answer that in a couple of ways. The first is what employers tell us, because we already know, and they tell us that they want to employ Otago graduates. They feel that not only have they learned their technical skills, perhaps if they're in medicine or if they're in one of our applied subjects, or because they've got, you know, a very good level of academic ability in terms of their writing if they're a humanities student, or their knowledge of a sector if they're a commerce student. So we know they're employable. So that's a mark of the student that I'm looking for. But I think more importantly for me personally is that they are good human beings. And many years ago, when I was a politician, I undertook a project on the future of work, looking at the importance of technology and the changing patterns of work. And I interviewed, I think, more than 100 CEOs for that project. And if I could distill down what they said to me, it was, we're looking for good human beings. We're looking for people who can work well with others. We're looking for people who've had rounded experiences, who've grown as people. And that's what I'm hoping our students emerge from the university, ready to change the world, ready to support their communities, to enhance the environment that they live in, to be good people. And that's what I'm looking for our graduates.
I couldn't agree more. 2 more questions. What advice would you give to the younger Grant?
Go to the gym. Look, I've been thinking a bit about that since I've been back here because it's such a familiar setting, yet quite a different role and experience for me. In all honesty, what I'd probably say to Grant is it's going to be all right. That's what I'd say. I had a few challenges with my mental health and well-being when I was a bit younger, particularly around the fact that I'm gay and that I was struggling with my sexuality. And I think when you're young, short periods of your life are large percentages of your life. And so therefore you take everything very seriously and very much on board. And as I said earlier, I look at students today. And I am concerned about the pressure that they're under and the complex world they're living in and their mental well-being. And so, I think I want to tell Grant that everything's going to turn out okay.
And then you sort of answered the next question was what, at these graduations or walking around campus, what advice do you give to young students on graduation?
Well, this is actually where I can refer back to the object because in one of my columns when I was the student president, I exhorted my fellow students to take it easy, but to take it. And I guess what I mean by that is enjoy the time of being a student here, but take every opportunity that comes up. And I actually had the honour of doing a graduation address when I first arrived here in August. And that was pretty much the message I gave. There are so many opportunities, so many possibilities, extraordinary staff that you're going to interact with on a daily basis. Take every opportunity from that experience, but also enjoy yourself while you're here.
And my last question is, what are you reading at the moment?
That's very interesting you say that. I have just started a novel and I try to read, when I was a politician, I couldn't read much fiction because there was a lot of non-fiction coming across my desk, although arguably some of that was fiction, but having the opportunity to actually read fictional books good. So there's a book by a New Zealand author named Damien Wilkins called Delirious, which I've just started, and it's about people going into an old folks home. So perhaps I'm looking into my crystal ball there as well.
So, look, Grant, this has been a wonderful conversation, and I hope that you've enjoyed it as much as I have. But I have never been to University of Otago, but I do know Dunedin because I had a very good friend at university who was from Dunedin, and I hope that our paths do cross at some stage. And I really wish you well in, really, I think what are exciting times. But boy, have you got a vision? Have you got the energy? And have you got the sort of the guts to carry an institution through what I think in New Zealand in particular is going to be very challenging.
Well, thanks, Judith. No, I have enjoyed the conversation, and you're most welcome here anytime. So please, if you ever find yourself in Dunedin, come and say hello and we'll welcome you here. But I'm enjoying the challenge and I definitely think I'm up for it. So thank you.
You have been listening to Studiosity's podcast, Reimagining Higher Education, candid conversations within higher education, sharing stories of leadership, change, and best practice in teaching and learning. Visit studiosity.com.